Perhaps you could start off by talking about the purpose of your trip to Canada and what you hope to accomplish while you're here.
It's not just Canada this time. So on the way, I stopped over in Frankfurt for a roundtable to get an understanding of the perception of the Europeans and the unfolding situation in Ukraine and post-Ukraine scenario, the role of China, and how the international community will perceive China post-Ukraine world order. That was one. It's quite educating for me because since I took over, there was pandemic, and with the little leeway that we could find in between, I managed to travel to Italy and Switzerland only over the last 10 months. So this time, of course, it came on the invitation of Speaker Pelosi, so that we had some very good meetings with Undersecretary Azrazea. She helped organize also a roundtable with ambassadors, because we are talking about like-minded countries coming together and working together. And the Deputy Chief of Mission of the Canadian Embassy was also there, along with others. We also met with Kurt Campbell of the National Security Council from the White House. Of course, we need to have more engagements and strategizing the way forward. Then, of course, our engagement with the Congress, with Speaker Pelosi, and with the Foreign Relations Committee, Foreign Affairs Committee, both Senate and House. And coming here, it's also to get an understanding of how Canada views the Canada-China relations, post the Michael's issue, and then post-Ukraine issue, the ongoing Ukraine issue. So, and explore what are the possibilities with the Canadian government. So we met with, of course, there was reception to widespread support from the Parliamentary Friends of Tibet. So we had a reception by the Arif Irani and other members on the first day of our visit here. Then we also had a meeting with the Foreign Ministry and the International Development, because they are supporting us on education. We need more support on that front. This program goes on till 24, so talked about renewal and also a new proposal to support our community, how to strengthen our community in exile. Because we have challenges in terms of demographic and social changes that are happening. People moving out of India, Nepal, and Bhutan into Europe, into North America. Today, Canada is the second largest home to Tibetans outside India, Nepal, Bhutan, next to the United States. So our lifelong relationship and Canada's recognition of His Holiness as honorary citizen of Canada, so all those and more. So today morning we had an informal hearing with the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and in the evening we'll have a formal televised hearing with the House Foreign Affairs Committee.
So do you think that the evolving world situation after the Russian invasion of Ukraine and China's showing, I guess what one might say, its true colors in supporting the Russians by not urging them to seek some reconciliation short of the terrible destruction of Ukraine, torture, rape, and so on. Do you think that this has increased the world's awareness of the need for more humanitarian intervention in China in terms of China's gross violations of international norms of human rights in Tibet and in the Uyghur regions? Do you think that there is a change in attitude that will lead foreign governments to become more supportive of what the Tibet Central Authority hopes for in terms of Western engagement of China with regard to Tibet?
there definitely seem to be much more interest than before, whether it's the Uyghur problem or the Sino-Tibet conflict, or with the Hong Kongers, or with Mongolians. I think it's time for recalibration of their policies towards China, and particularly with Canada, the two Michaels issue, I think, really stunk them. This was totally unexpected, and the relations have been affected to a level it'll be difficult to come back to in the near short term. The world community, I think, has woken up to the reality, because every time problems come up, it's very far away from Europe or far away from North America. And Ukraine is on the footsteps of Europe. So that really is a huge concern for Europe as well, because now nothing can be taken for granted. Security issues are becoming much more alarming when nations of the same creed come together. When Xi and Putin met before Olympics and explained about their deeper than sea relationship, I'm sure there must have been understanding between them. That is also the reason why China was not criticizing Russia for its actions. There were also talks about China not wanting Russia to invade Ukraine before the Olympics was over, but that didn't happen. So, but at the same time, China is also worried about secondary sanctions if they are too overt in their support for Russia. But it's very evident from the social media and the spokesperson's perspectives on the evolving situation in Ukraine that they are not criticizing the aggression. And for us, it reminds us of China's invasion of Tibet in 1950. And unfortunately, during that time, the Korean War was also going on, so we had no international support or at that time. But with Ukraine, also even now, so every time you watch news, I keep telling, if there is a civilian movement to go into Ukraine, I'll be the first to join that group to face the situation there. It's very unfortunate, but there's nothing, you feel so helpless. And the Europeans have certainly woken up. There were a lot of apprehensions as to what some governments might do because of too much dependence on Russian energy and other things. But Europeans have also come out strongly now, despite the challenges they face. And Russia now has made it possible for NATO to come together. And I think we still need a few more months to watch the situation, the evolving situation, the developments as to what role China is playing or will play, and what will be the new global order, what consequences will it lead to, and what are the opportunities for Tibet and Uyghurs and Hong Kongers. There is definitely more interest, and I'm sure there will be much more coordinated and concerted effort from the free world against China.
And then the question of the Tibetan diaspora in Canada, there have been very serious situations with regard to harassment and menacing of Tibetans in our country. I can think of Kami Lamo, distinguished young Tibetan Canadian woman who became the head of the student government in the Scarborough campus of the University of Toronto, who was subject to some very menacing, dangerous, and shameful harassment by people who may have been agents of the Chinese state. The Canadian government, I would suspect, because of concern about offending China, has not developed any unit to respond to this kind of harassment. So Uyghurs and Tibetans and ethnic Chinese democracy activists who have been subject to harassment. Hong Kong activists are not able to get the protection of the Canadian government as citizens of Canada, or indeed just even if they're not citizens of Canada, they should be protected under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms from harassment. I noted that at the dinner that we had with the chairman of the Canada Tibet Committee, that the 2 Hong Kong young women who attended there were followed by Chinese in a car when they stopped to pick me up. The Chinese car also stopped, not sure what was, I was walking home, they stopped to pick me up. Chinese in the car were puzzled and stopped their car, not knowing what to do. So do you think that you can play any role in encouraging the Canadian government to become more protective of Tibetan diaspora against this kind of harassment by agents of the PRC who would like to suppress their freedom to express their support for their co-religionists in Tibet?
Yeah, the kind of harassment that Chimil Hamo faced was much before the Michael's event happened. So we have been talking about this for a long time, China's intrusion and how they try to influence communities internationally, and we're also talking about transnational oppression. Only now countries are waking up to that. In fact, at one time, Confucius institutions were very much well received because they put in a lot of money into the system. And then they, through the Chinese scholars and students associations, which are also the arms of the consulates and the embassies of the Chinese government, we also know for a fact that United Workfront is very visible in their efforts. Earlier, before 2014, United Workfront was more within China to create problems with the nationalities, different nationalities, but now they are going beyond. So now the question is whether Canadian issues are domestic issues of Canada or China is infringing on the domestic issues of Canada. So I think Canada is also waking up. The Canadian government is also waking up, and some policies are in place or will be in place. So I think Canadian government will be much more proactive than before. And I think it's timely that they do so, because we have been saying this for so long. Of course, we feel vindicated, but that doesn't help. There has to be concrete measures from the Canadian government or any other government, because China's intrusion into other nations are all pervasive, too pervasive, and their propaganda is so strong that their narrative has overtaken the Tibet narrative. And that's why we have to focus now on the weakness of China, which is they know that they lack legitimacy over Tibet. So this is their Achilles heel. And now we are changing that. We're trying to change the narrative, because His Holiness climbed down from independence to middle way approach, and the world community does not realize that. And when the countries, of course, following one China policy, keep saying Tibet is part of PRC, then again, you are going against international law, because this only agreement we had with China was the 17-point agreement signed in 1950, which was signed after invasion of Tibet in 1950, which is a unfair agreement. If there is anybody who abides by international law today, and why does China keep saying that? Because they know they lack legitimacy, and they're trying to seek that from the international community. So when the international community keeps saying that, of course, the reality today is that Tibet is under occupation of China. So on the one hand, you say Tibet is part of PRC. On the other hand, you also say you support negotiation between the representatives of His Holiness Dalai Lama or the Central Tibetan Administration with the Chinese government. But then there is no reason for China to come to the negotiating table. When you keep saying Tibet is part of PRC, then you are also telling the Chinese government, you do whatever you want in Tibet and we don't care, or we will not interfere. So this we find as contradiction. So we have to change this narrative about the historical independent status of Tibet, which needs to be recognized to gain leverage for the middle way approach. We are not changing our policy from middle way approach, avoiding two extremes of what was before invasion of communist China and what is today. What we need is the urgency of the matter is for us to preserve our identity, our language. Now Xi Jinping's policies are striking at the very root of Tibetan identity, because our language came from India, not from China. Our religion also came from India. So in that sense, we are a repository of ancient Indian culture and wisdom. It has nothing to do with China. And for Tibetan, spirituality is very, very important. We have been practicing this over more than 1,300 years, and that defines our thinking and way of life. China always focuses only on development, development, development. They feel that any solution to any conflict or problem is development. But for Tibetans, material development alone does not bring happiness or mental peace. We are not against development. Everybody wants development. But development for whom? Again, that's a big question. Why this network of roads, railways, airports? Mostly to take away Tibet's natural resources into China. When they can, as factory of the world, when they can go as far as to Africa and Latin America for resources, then definitely they're going to exploit Tibet's natural resources, because Tibet was a virgin land. Tibetans never excavated or exploited resources. We always lived in harmony with nature. Then there's so many other issues striking. The Tibet's environment is also one of the important issues which concerns not just Tibet, because Tibet, we call ourselves, in our prayers also, we call Tibet as the heavenly abode, surrounded by snow mountain ranges. That's how we start our prayer. And I think as far back as 1906, a Westerner American who was in China as a missionary, he coined the term roof of the world because of its altitude of more than 12,000 feet above sea level on an average. And Asians call Tibet as the fountain of Asian rivers or source of Asian rivers. Now the Chinese environmental scientists call Tibet as the third pole, because Tibet has the largest amount of glaciers and permafrost that feeds all these 10 major rivers into Pakistan, into India, Bangladesh, Burma, Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, Vietnam, and into China. So the water security issue is a huge thing in the coming years. Right now, the Southeast Asian countries, the downstream countries of the Tibetan rivers do not have courage enough to stand up to Communist China, even though Communist China uses the multiple layers of dams as a water tap, to close it or open it whenever they want. So when they open it, there could be flooding. When they close it, there is drying up of riverbeds. So that results in transportation of people lose livelihood based on river water system. So we have always been saying we are political refugees today. Another few decades down the line, there could be a lot more environmental refugees, because some estimate that about 2 billion people directly or indirectly depend on their livelihood, depend on rivers that originate from Tibet. So water security is a huge issue, not just concerning Tibet. And the climate change that is twice the speed of changes that are happening in other parts of the world is definitely going to impact the whole region, if not the whole world. So those are things that really concerns us.
I think that, certainly Canada has a responsibility to the UN covenants, including on international covenants on climate and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and many other covenants, most of which China has ratified. The International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights. China, as you know, signed it but didn't ratify. But when our ambassador to China, Dominic Barton, visited Tibet in the end of 2020, he gave a report to Parliament which had 3 points which came to my attention. First of all, is he felt that he had visited a monastery and that the monks were free and happy to talk about religion. Secondly, he visited a countryman's home and observed that on the second floor there was an altar for him to pray to Buddha. And thirdly, he spoke favorably of the resettlement of herders into villages as a significant poverty alleviation program. How do you feel about all of these kinds of reports? And what do you think is the genuine situation for Tibetans in Tibet based on your own information? I think our ambassador was given a tour that was carefully monitored, and of course he did not go with a Tibetan interpreter.
That is what China is good at doing, to define Tibet as a socialist paradise. If that is really the case, why just ambassador? Why can't other ordinary Canadian citizens or journalists or other diplomats can go to Tibet on their own free will, visit wherever they want to, not places where China wants to show them? So maybe ambassador doesn't have a very clear idea of what is going on in Tibet. When you're taken on such tours, you're taken to the best places. And if there is religious freedom, then why there's so much restriction on the movement of the monks and nuns inside Tibet? Or why do you need Public Security Bureau, United Workfront, and intelligence to manage the monasteries and call it Buddhism with Chinese characteristics? Even resettlement projects, Tibetans have been stakeholders in managing the Tibet ecology for thousands and thousands of years. Why are they removed from these places, terming as natural reserves? Are there real improvement in the environmental situation of Tibet because the nomads were moved? There are studies about environmental situation, glaciers and all that, but there are no studies about the social impact in relation with the situation. So moving the Tibetans to compact communities, you might see nice buildings and all that, but do they have a good new livelihood option for them? Has the ambassador seen that? Is it free for him to go to any other monastery and meet with lamas and see if there is real freedom of religion? So I think maybe the ambassador needs to have a relook at the situation inside Tibet, and maybe to confirm ambassador's statements, there should be few other delegations from Canada to check whether that is the reality of the situation or not.
Yes, and certainly he saw a play which spoke favorably of the marriage of a Tibetan princess to a Han, important figure which was supposed to be characteristic of how Tibetan Han relations are. I think that there's also, based on my own limited discussions with monks in the Jokan Temple in Lhasa, there's concern about the transmission of the higher level esoteric culture of Tibet, the transmission of the civilization because of Chinese government restrictions on the activities of the monasteries. My last question before we have to go. I know that part of this delegation is to raise awareness of the situation of the Panchen Lama. We know that the 10th Panchen Lama was imprisoned in China for quite a long time, and not long after he was released, made a fairly strong statement expressing concern about the PRC's policies in Tibet, and then 3 days later, I think it was 3 days later, he died under unclear circumstances. Now we have the 11th Panchen Lama who, as a little boy of 6, in 1995, has disappeared to us. We don't know what his true fate is. What do you hope to accomplish in Canada with regard to the issue of the Panchen Lama, and I guess also related the future incarnation of His Holiness the Dalai Lama?
Every one of us knows that it's a political decision for the Chinese to abduct a 6-year-old boy. And I think they made a very tactical mistake, but not by not recognizing the boy recognized by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. If they had done that, they would still have that boy, Khendu Chushingima, under their control and use him for future reincarnations. That was a very, very now Chinese government might regret it. They're also testing waters. They sent their own selection of Panchen Lama to Thailand and see how the reaction is. And the Chinese selected Panchen Lama might also be in Nepal, because Chinese put a lot of pressure on Nepal, and then maybe force people to come to listen to him to see that, okay, Chinese selected Panchen Lama is recognized by Buddhists in the Himalayan region. So all these tricks China will be playing. But no Tibetans recognize the Chinese selected Panchen Lama. Even now in Lhasa, you won't find the picture of Chinese selected Panchen Lama, and they have no. It's not possible for them to display the picture of the Panchen Lama recognized by His Holiness Dalai Lama Kendishu Nyima. You find pictures of only the 10th Panchen Lama, who, as you said, died under very mysterious circumstances. So it's all political, as everybody knows, and they want to use this as a tool for the selection of the 15th Dalai Lama, which nobody will accept, including then if the Chinese government is really serious about reincarnation. His Holiness always says and jest that the communist leaders should learn Buddhism first to understand what reincarnation is all about. Reincarnation is the will of the person who is going to be reincarnated, not forced by the Communist Party. So His Holiness always says in jest that if Chinese government is really serious about reincarnation, they should look for Mao Zedong's reincarnation first, Deng Xiaoping's reincarnation second, and then maybe the Dalai Lama's. So that itself shows how, yeah. So if Chinese are really serious about reincarnation, that should be the case. So otherwise, they have no right, Communist China, who does not believe in religion. But then, of course, there are a lot of stories of Tibetan Lamas visiting China and then communist leaders asking them to pray for them. So you always find this dichotomy and, conflicts of thinking. Even communist leaders have to die one day. So before they die, they have to think about what is going to happen to them, whether there's a next life or not. So yes, we want the Panchen Lama to be freed. He has been incapacitated by not giving him religious teachings that he would be in a position to fulfill his religious responsibilities. So we want him to be restored his traditional role as a religious leader. And until that happens, we'll continue to seek for more information. And Chinese government always says he's hale and he's hearty, he's fine, he doesn't want to be disturbed. Who decides for whom? And China's government is so opaque that even after so many years, we are not able to find out whether he's alive or not, unfortunately.
I'm sure that Canada would be prepared to send a distinguished figure along with other global figures to visit him if the Chinese government would allow. So is there anything else that you'd like to add before we go into the other meeting?
Yeah, I think it's very important that governments realize, for us, it's not just to feel good as being vindicated for the statements that we have making, because we have been dealing with the Chinese for so many centuries. We understand how they function. The West doesn't understand China. Now only they are waking up to the reality. So China does not respect weakness. The more you cow down to them, the more you listen to them, then you become their pony. Then they keep riding you over and over. If you want to be the pony, listen to them. If you want to stand up and be your own nation, stand up for, even in Canada, the trade balance is also 25 billion export to China and 77 billion import from China. It's a huge trade imbalance. So I always say, don't treat yourself as a butter. As we have a saying in Tibetan, you hit the butter at the stone, the butter loses. You hit the stone at the butter, also butter. Don't think you are butter. Because if somebody is losing, it's both sides losing in trade, not just one side, not just Canada. It's China who's going to lose more. So you have to use those leverages. You just can't listen to China and kowtow to them all the time. If you do that, then you're going to reach nowhere. You stand up to them and you get what you need.
Well, thank you very much for speaking with us today.
Thank you.